George, go.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. The last day of SISE, the fifth day. Been a wonderful week. Just to review, Monday we talked about the high-level picture of decarbonization, the need, the status, and the outlook. Tuesday we talked about the new energy economy with Chris Gould and a UN study of the Midwest. On Wednesday, tools for change, both in Chicago and at the national perspective. MK Dorsey as the keynoter. Yesterday it was social impact startups and entrepreneurs, and today we're going to wind up with a focus on the US-Canada energy challenges and the SISE ecosystem map that the fellows had been working on actually even before SISE started on Monday officially. So first up will be Rachel McCormick, who will give us the concluding keynote for the day and for SISE. She's the Consul General of Canada to the states of Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. And she's actually, her home base is Dallas. She was the head of the Energy Environment section of the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C. from 2014 to 2019. And she joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in 2004. In Ottawa, and she worked in divisions responsible for sustainable development, energy, climate change, and circumpolar affairs. So she is very well informed and has a wonderfully grounded perspective on energy and environment. And Rachel, can I ask, we were talking earlier with Rachel, and she had an interesting story about her education, which just absolutely aligns with what SISE thinks about critical thinking and what we've been talking about all week for critical thinking. So Rachel, if you'd say a little bit about yourself to more than I did as you start, that would be great.
Great. Well, first off, thank you so much, George, for welcoming me. I know that our office in Chicago has a really long and productive relationship with the Institute. And it's one we value, the Government of Canada values. And to all the fellows, no matter where you land, we have a strong network of consulates and embassies around the world. And we look forward to connecting with you again. We anticipate that you're going to be doing great things, having joined this program. So a little bit about what we were talking, George was mentioning. The intersection between the economy and sustainability has really been my passion for since I left high school, to be quite honest, from undergrad. This might age me a little bit, but the environmental science program I did, you could do a second major and you could choose from biology, chemistry, geography, and economics. And I was only the second person ever to choose economics. And people would ask me, like, what does the economy have to do with environmental science? And at that point I was saying, what doesn't it have to do with environmental science? And I'm so glad that now that sort of integration is just so obvious and that studies are really focusing on that. And when I went on to grad school, I actually chose my grad school based on the fact that I went to the University of Calgary for both the master's and the PhD programs. It required what was called an intervention component. So when you finish your thesis or your dissertation, you had to have an extra chapter at the end that talked about how do you solve this in the real world, not just from an academic sense. What are the practical applications? So who are the actors that can affect change? And what are the barriers to their progress based on your research? So that was really important to me. And it was also important to me that the conversations were interdisciplinary. So you worked across fields. And on my dissertation committee, I had a lawyer, an economist, somebody from the MBA program, and a scientist. So just a little bit more background there for me. I know that this week wasn't exactly the way that you anticipated, meeting face-to-face, FaceTime to FaceTime instead of face-to-face. And I hope that in a future iteration of this, you'll be able to get together and have drinks and discuss these ideas and enjoy the food and architecture of Chicago. That's something I look forward to as well. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, in the backdrop of a global pandemic, as well as, of course, the fight for racial equity and human rights around the globe, and the significant challenge of climate change, how we might be thinking about in Canada approaching specifically the issue of climate change, but also touching on some of these other aspects. We know that big challenges require collaborative and inclusive approaches, And I know that you've been talking about that all week. So I think I'm going to be building a lot on what you spoke about throughout the week. And I know you had a lot of excellent keynotes who I've had the pleasure of spending time with in the past that have big ideas and aren't at all scared to take on complex challenges. Just to start, I wanted to say that I think we recognize, the Government of Canada really recognizes the importance of collaboration amongst different levels of government. In Canada, we work very closely with our provinces. We have shared jurisdiction over a lot of things that relate to the energy sector, the environment, water, the economy. But we also work really collaboratively with industry, thought leaders, and of course, we have to work together as countries. And so we are actually very committed to a strong multilateral approach to global issues, whether it's the pandemic or climate change. We are committed to the Paris Climate Agreement. We are leading the charge internationally on the issue of plastic pollution, having launched a plastics charter during our G7 chairship. And we're actually hosting the World Circular Economy Forum next year. It's supposed to be this year, delayed. And we're working both domestically and internationally on the issue of biodiversity. For example, we surpassed our goal of 10% of our oceans being protected in Canada. And this week joined the Global Ocean Alliance to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. We are also very committed to rules-based free trade. We are the only G7 country to have a free trade agreement with all G7 countries. And we also, of course, have an agreement with the Pacific market in Europe. And on July 1st, which was Canada Day, we saw a modernized NAFTA come into effect with the United States, Canada, Mexico-Canada agreement. It has a different name, which depending on which country you come from, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Another very strong basis to our approach is fact and science-based decision-making. Now let me speak just for a bit about one of the challenges in Canada, which depending on how you look at it, is also actually an amazing opportunity. We have a vast and diversified portfolio of energy resources, both renewable and hydrocarbon-based. To take advantage of this endowment, we see the benefit. We produce large quantities of energy, both for domestic consumption and also for export. It's a large part of our GDP, and it also provides a lot of jobs. But at the same time, we understand the importance of acting on climate change. We understand that the economic impacts of climate change could reach as much as $43 billion a year in the next 20 years in Canada. So we know we have to work to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Our oil and gas resources make it a very attractive investment place for continuing development and production. But we know we have to ensure how we develop those projects is consistent with our commitment to climate change as well as engaging our local communities. You might be surprised about this, but we actually have over 80% of our electricity from renewable energy. And our goal is actually to expand that to 90% by 2030. And about 17% of our total primary energy supply right now is from renewable sources. So how are we acting on climate change in Canada? We have something that's called the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. And it was developed in consultation with the provinces and the territories of Canada, as well as with the Indigenous peoples and industry. And it has a number of pillars within it that really help us address where our challenges are. A lot of our emissions come from the transportation and the industrial sector, but also from buildings. So those are the areas that we know we have to focus on. Interestingly, though, if you think about it, framework on clean growth and climate change. So it really, from the very beginning, talked about the intersection with the economy and investment and innovation. And that has been a very consistent connection for the Government of Canada throughout the time that the Trudeau government has been in place. There's always very, very much a focus on both the economy and the environment together. The potential for jobs, the potential for growth, the recognition of the huge global market that is being created for clean tech, and the role that Canada could play in leading that, and also the opportunities that are there for our businesses. I want to focus in on one pillar of the Pan-Canadian Framework, which is pricing carbon pollution. Why do we do that? It provides an incentive to change behavior, to innovate, to reduce the waste of a valuable resource, and then, of course, reduce our emissions. We currently have a price of carbon at $30 a ton, but I want to say before I get into it that we actually had pricing on carbon since 2007, and it started at the provincial level. I can't stress enough the role that the provinces play in this regard. Leaderships in the provinces saw a carbon tax in place in Alberta, in British Columbia, a levy in Alberta, and a cap and trade system in Quebec, which is actually linked to California. When the Trudeau government came into power, they ran on a platform that they would have a price on carbon across Canada. And in doing that, in 2019, they put in place two elements. One, a price on fuel, and second, an output-based pricing system for large facilities. So provinces had an option to use the federal system or use their own system. And there's a variety across the country right now. The price started at $20 and it increases $10 a year until it hits $50, at which point we will do an assessment on next steps. In addition to pricing pollution, we're doing a lot of other things, including for energy efficiency, clean transportations, and regulations to meet our goal of reducing methane emissions by 45% by 2025. But alongside all of these efforts was an investment, $2 billion through a low carbon economy fund. And that fund is used to invest in projects to reduce emissions across the country, but also to improve resiliency. And actually, it was really important that the investment was actually half-half. It was about improving resiliency and reducing emissions to make sure that our country and our communities and our companies were ready for the future. We knew that clean technology was a really important place to invest. We created a lot of innovation and growth by investing in low carbon challenges, for example, and I think you'll hear more about that later, and also thinking about how to partner with industry on really important things like carbon capture. So now let's get to the heart of the challenge I spoke about. We're rich in resources. We're committed to taking action on climate change. So what does the energy system of the future look like when a lot of our jobs depend on hydrocarbons? So at the same time as we developed that pan-Canadian framework on climate change, clean growth and climate change, we did a process called Generation Energy. We talked to Canadians, we talked to industry, we talked about what our energy system of the future is going to look like. And at the end of it all, it came down to 4 themes: cleaner oil and gas, higher efficiency, clean power, and renewable fuels. And I just want to take a minute before we wrap up on the idea of cleaner oil and gas. You've likely heard all about Canada's oil sands. But what you may not be aware of is that through innovation, the per barrel emissions of our oil sands have actually decreased 24% since 2012. We have new technologies coming that project another decrease of 17 to 26% by 2030. So think about that. Essentially a 50% reduction in less than 20 years. And many of the operators in the oil sands have a commitment to being net zero by 2050. Another important thing to think about is that in the oil sands, we have a really huge monitoring program. It's actually the largest publicly available, transparent environmental monitoring system in the world on water, air emissions, et cetera. And it allows the community, allows any one of you to look and see what the emissions or water issues are at any day, any point in time. Another really great example of that intersection of energy and environment for the future is a project on Canada's west coast. We'll see the world's cleanest large LNG export facility being built. That's as a result of both technology and having fully a baseload of renewable energy powering it. That's not to say that we are only focusing on oil and gas. As I mentioned, we're talking about clean energy as well. I mentioned before that we have a 90% clean electricity goal and also a focus on increasing the electrification of industry, given our richness in terms of renewable energy. But I wanted to have, perhaps provocatively, note that given the significant roles that hydrocarbons play in economies around the world, efforts to reduce their emissions in the short and medium, possibly long term, are actually indeed important. I also want to talk about the importance of us being inclusive when we're talking about energy systems. And that's why Canada decided to be a co-lead for a program called Equal by 30, which is trying to advance the participation of women in the clean energy transition. At home, we're working really hard to ensure strong consultations with Indigenous communities in the context of resource development, and also to ensure those communities are part of our investment strategy for energy transitions and building resilience to climate change. These are incredibly challenging times. I'm sure that you have heard the words unprecedented many times this week, but that means we're all in a position of having to work hard, having to work smarter. But I did get a chance to look at your resumes, and I'm pretty confident that you're going to be the people that we need to take on these challenges. And so before we get into the Q&A, and I'm excited to hear your questions and your thoughts, I just want to give you my sincere congratulations to all of you for nearly completing your program. And I'm sure we're going to be able to count yourselves amongst world changers that affect change in the future. So kudos to you all and look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you, Rachel. That was wonderful. We do have time for questions. Fellows, are there questions? You can signal us on chat. Let's see. I think,
George, if it's okay
yeah,
with you, can I ask a question?
of course, please.
So my question, Rachel, is about Canada's electricity markets are deregulated, right? Provinces can decide on the generation, transmission, distribution, which is obviously, advantageous because there's that local knowledge aspect, but obviously a bit harder when you're thinking about how do we export power from the prairies to the demand centers on the coasts. I was just sort of wondering on how the Canadian government's thinking about how it's going to evolve over the next couple of decades, because obviously you can either go to a fully centralized approach of we're going to have these massive wind farms, or you can go to the opposite, the distributed microgrid systems. And either way works. It's just sort of a value judgment. And to do the centralized model, you need to improve that transmission capacity, which is not really possible right now because of the separate decision-making structures.
Sorry, and really quick, that was Nathaniel, right?
Yes, sure. Thomas.
I just want to make sure Rachel knows Nathaniel is our resident Canadian in the program. So.
Thanks for the question. It's a really important one. So it's interesting, when you look at, so I didn't put this, didn't say this before, but when you look at the energy system of North America, it's highly integrated. And maybe you've talked about this already, but we have over 70 pipelines and over 30 transmission lines that actually mostly run north-south. So if you look at the map, there's as much integration north-south as there is east-west. And so it is really a conversation that is important to have across borders as well, but also across internal borders, because we don't have a lot of connections between our provinces. Provinces are the equivalent of states in Canada. Electricity is actually under provincial jurisdiction. So we collaborate with the US through what's called NERC. So the United States has FERC. And each of our provinces have their own electricity governance situations. And so the 10 provinces and FERC together make the North American Electricity Reliability Council. And they work together on everything from cyber to reliability standards, et cetera. And so I think we're looking at transitioning. There's a few important things. I want to just flag a really great project that I always like to talk about as maybe the poster child of that sort of north-south transmission in terms of energy transition. And that's a project that says transmission of clean baseload hydropower down to Minnesota from Manitoba. That's allowed coal power to be backed out, but also maintain baseload for a company. And it was a collaboration between Minnesota Power and Manitoba Power, Manitoba Hydro, with a long-term investment to build a transmission line that is allowing that transition to take place. So that's just a really great project about collaboration amongst different districts. Lots of conversation within Canada about that type of collaboration. So some provinces like Quebec are pretty much 100% hydropower, same with Manitoba, where other provinces are more reliant on fossil fuel-based electricity. So all of those things are really important to think about as we're investing in different systems. Microgrids, localized energy are going to be important. We're also thinking about small modular reactors. In Canada, we have released what's called a small modular reactor roadmap. And we are going to this fall be releasing an action plan in terms of implementation on that. But what it found was that those small modular reactors can be really important zero emission baseload for industry, especially remote industry. Secondly, for communities, remote communities that right now perhaps are on diesel, which is not good in it really from an economy or environment perspective. And then finally for sort of general electricity transmission. But really in terms of the electrification of industry, there's a huge potential there. So I think it's not definitely not a one or the other approach. And it's important for us to think about where the needs are differently across districts in Canada.
Great answer. And Suzanne, I think you had a question.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for sharing with us, Rachel, all the strong environmental and social policy that the Canadian government has implemented. And I could see a lot of commitment from a governmental level. And that's very different from what we see here in the US. Did I freeze? I froze. No?
We can still hear you. We can
Oh,
hear you.
okay, good. Okay, I'm sorry. So that's very different from what we see here in the United States. And I was wondering if you could name one challenge that the United States have to overcome, or one main action or one main change that needs to be done in this country so we can follow a similar path.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there's some other questions on the chat sort of about the Canada-US cooperation and issues there. You know, our collaboration with the United States is very deep and varied. We have worked with the US on technologies across different things. So whether it's CCUS or oil and gas, energy efficiency standards, we have aligned energy efficiency standards for appliances in many ways. And so when we talk with the US, we also collaborate with states. And so we have there's a North American Climate Partnership, which sees Canada, Mexico, and a number of the states that are working towards a 2030 goal, working together on things like, and I saw some mention about electric vehicles in the chat as well. So we're talking about movement to zero emission vehicles. How do small states, provinces with small populations transition to electric vehicles? And we're sharing information and best practices on that. And we're investing in that infrastructure in Canada as well. Obviously, in terms of things like methane reduction, that's a challenge across North America. And so sharing information on that, that's a shared challenge. And, you know, some areas that perhaps might not come to mind immediately. Aaron, who you'll have a great chance to collaborate with and listen to in the panel, and I were part of an organization of a great discussion at the Canadian Embassy last year on collaboration on artificial intelligence and advanced materials in the energy and industrial sector. And those things can be really important for optimizing operations and reducing emissions. So I think, you know, it's, although policy goals may have a different slant, there's still a lot of concrete action that we're doing collaboratively with Canada and the US.
Great answer, Rachel. Thanks so much. We have time for one more fast question. And Karen, you had an interesting question about oil and gas demand.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. My question was, you talked a lot about the innovation to make a lot of the oil and gas facilities cleaner and more efficient, but has the Pan-Canadian framework considered the impact of like falling demand for oil and gas as we transition to EVs? And have you like begun to work with industry to plan ahead for that reduced production and a transition of workers away from the oil and gas sector?
Yeah, that's so, you know, it's interesting you use the word transition with workers, and I think that's really important. And when we were the chair of the G7, it was the first time we had the term just transition included in a communique for the G7. And I think that really speaks to that idea. And so we had a task force on just transition that was taken across Canada, and it was actually the head of our labor union, Labor Council in Canada, that had those conversations across Canada, thinking about like, so what happens, how do we, for example, take boilermakers, how do they transition into the clean energy economy, where are those skills going to be needed? So it was a really important discussion, not that there wasn't hard conversations, and there will be, but definitely that's part of the conversation in terms of how do we transition as we're thinking about a clean energy economy. That's part of the dialogue consistently, and it's a really important part. As I mentioned, we do have, so our second highest amount of emissions comes from the transportation sector. It's a very close second. So we are thinking about how to reduce that, both through low carbon fuel, and also zero emission vehicles. We've invested in infrastructure for charging, and you can actually drive all the way across Canada now and charge across Canada. And we've had some new announcements even just this week on investments for charging infrastructure across our.
So we lost you, Rachel. I think something froze in the internet connection.
Yeah, looks like we've
So
lost.
you know. So Rachel, I'm going to, I think, close off the discussion now in view of the time. Thank you so much for that very high level and very, at the same time, penetrating analysis of the U.S.-Canada situation in energy. And as our closest neighbor with the highest energy economy, it's obviously a very important question. Let's turn now, if we can, to the panel closely related to Rachel's keynote. We have 4 members of the panel. The title of the panel is the U.S. Heartland, Canada and Beyond. So our panel members are Aaron Annable, began his assignment as Energy Counselor at the Embassy of Canada in Washington, D.C. in 2016. Prior to that, he was Senior Advisor for Energy and Environmental Issues at Global Affairs Canada in Ottawa. And in 2014-15, he served for a few months as the Acting Consul General of Canada to New England, based in Boston. Our second panelist is Hamid Rastapur, who is a frequent contributor to SISE. And Hamid, thanks so much for doing this again this year. He's the Henry R. Linden Professor of Engineering and Director of the Wanger Institute for Sustainable Energy Research at Illinois Institute of Technology, just down the road from UIC in Chicago. Since 1985, he's been a member of the Chemical Engineering faculty at IIT, where he served as chairman of the department from '89 to 2003, and dean of the Armour College of Engineering from 2003 to 2008. So Hamid, welcome back, and we look forward to what you have to say. Third panelist is John Brogley. He's the water director with Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. He's been a member of the Alliance leadership team since 2012, more than 40 years of experience in the energy and petrochemical industries. He joined the Oil Sands Alliance from Canadian Natural Resources, where he worked for more than 8 years in coal production. So John, again, welcome to the SISE panel, and we look forward to your comments. And our fourth and final panelist is Deborah Philbrick. She's the program officer for climate solutions at the MacArthur Foundation. So she works in the climate solutions teams, works with the climate solution, boy, I'm mangling my words here. Deborah works with the climate solutions team's director and colleagues on all aspects of strategy grant making in the United States, China, and India. In her previous role, she was Senior Manager of Research and Innovation at Elevate Energy, where she worked to ensure that all sectors realize the benefits of the clean energy economy. She helped launch the first of its kind solar program called Illinois Solar for All. So Deborah, we look forward to your comments. I'm going to ask each panelist to take 5 to 7 minutes for some introductory remarks. If you'd like to say a little bit more about yourselves and how you got to where you are for a minute or so, that would be wonderful. And then we'll follow with Q&A with the fellows. So let's start with Aaron, if you would.
Thanks a lot, George, and hello, everyone. Really pleased to be joining you today, and congratulations. As George mentioned, I'm the energy counselor at the Embassy of Canada, Washington. I've been here for 4 years. So in this role, I promote Canadian energy resources, and I work with various U.S. government departments and agencies to look for ways that we can strengthen our collaboration. And I also did very similar work in Boston for 5 years as well. I've been doing sort of Canada-US energy issues for quite some time now. So I'm going to say a few things, and I'll try and keep it brief, and some of it will touch on comments that Rachel has made already, but maybe in a bit more detail. So I want to focus specifically on the idea of inclusivity. In looking at sort of two of our big challenges that we're facing right now. The first being, COVID-19 economic recovery, specifically for the energy sector, and also our overall efforts to reduce our emissions that will continue at the same time. And so these are huge challenges. In Canada, the energy sector is tremendously important to our economy, includes over 1,000 companies directly, and then with another 3,500 businesses in the services sector that support it. So all told, this sector represents more than 576,000 jobs in Canada, and this includes also employment for 11,000 Indigenous people. So as we work towards economic recovery, and specifically for our energy sector, as well as our energy transition advances, we believe in taking the approach that inclusivity is the key to building a greener future. And we have to resolve that people aren't left behind, and that as we lower emissions, we must ensure that those working in the high-emitting, non-renewable energy sectors, that they aren't left behind. They must be included in the transition with meaningful good work. And this also has to be a shared objective sort of across Canada and working with our provinces to build a stronger, more innovative energy sector that drives a more prosperous and ultimately more sustainable economy. And this has to include the regions and provinces in Canada that produce a lot of our non-renewable energy right now. And this commitment, it has to mean equipping workers and communities with the right skills so that they may transition and succeed. And so combined with the challenge of COVID-19 energy sector recovery is our emissions objectives. So in late 2019, Government of Canada announced our commitment to exceed our 2030 emissions reductions target and begin to work towards achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And that includes setting legally binding 5-year emissions reductions milestones. And so this means that countries either emit no GHG emissions at all or offset them completely through actions that remove carbon dioxide and other climate warming gases. So how are we going to do this? We're going to look to the advice of experts and consult with Canadians to ensure the path to net zero is sensitive to the needs of our country, while at the same time growing the economy. We're among, I think, over 120 countries, 398 cities, and hundreds of businesses who have also committed to reaching net zero by 2050. And to date, few countries have a comprehensive plan on how they will do this. And I have to say, frankly, right now, Canada is no exception. We don't yet have a plan in place. We're currently working on it, and it's a huge challenge. But again, I think as we move towards this, inclusivity is going to have to be at the center of that. And just a few examples of things we've done in our energy sector that can be applied to these huge challenges. So Rachel mentioned just transition. So in 2018, we announced final regulations to phase out traditional coal-fired electricity by 2030. And that's when we also announced the creation of the task force on just transition for coal power workers and communities. So the task force released 2 reports with several recommendations for the government to support effective workers and communities, and another report that summarized what we heard when we consulted with these communities. So to advance this, the government created a Canada Coal Transition Initiative. And so the 2 objectives of that initiative are to mitigate the impacts of the coal phase out and to maintain the long-term viabilities of communities where coal production was prominent. So we have a department that's called Western Economic Diversification, and that looks at sort of economic development in the western part of the country. And that's where a lot of our coal production and coal-fired power was. And so they've focused their efforts under the initiative on community identified needs, given that the demographic and geographic diversity in each area does present unique challenges. So by the end of 2019, 15 projects totaling $9 million in funding were announced under this initiative. And approved projects have included transition centers, strategic planning projects, business supports, and also worker training. So a number of Canadian federal departments are also looking at the topic of future skills to ensure that displaced workers are reflected in our policy development. To this end, we established a Future Skills Council in 2019 to provide further advice to the government on how to advance this work. And so this council's been consulting and gathering perspectives from across private, public, and not-for-profit sectors on emerging and persistent skills gaps and the identification of transferable skills and competencies needed across different sectors. And so membership here is public, private, and not-for-profit. It's gender balanced. It has social geographic diversity, including First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and youth. So at minimum, this effort, 50% of this funding will be targeted toward addressing the needs of disadvantaged and unrepresented groups. So we're proud of the progress we've made at home with all coal-burning provinces implementing their plans to phase out coal in the years ahead. And our transition to clean energy is putting Canada on a pathway to, as Rachel said, having 90% non-emitting electricity generation by 2030. I wanted to say a few things about Indigenous relations, which is a priority for this government in Canada, and also to advance energy projects in Canada now. You must conduct meaningful Indigenous consultations, and that's been established through legal precedents, and it's also been enshrined in federal environmental assessment legislation. It's foundational to developing Canada's energy resources and also to bringing prosperity to Indigenous communities. And I think we hear a lot about First Nations tribes that are opposed to energy project development, but I think what we hear less about is another part of this story where tribes are not only supportive of energy project development, but they're increasingly involved directly in projects with equity ownership. And we're seeing that growing in Alberta in some oil sands projects where tribes have equity partnerships. And there was an example in northern Manitoba where a Cree First Nation became an equity partner on a hydro generating station. And one thing for two of our pipeline projects, being the Line 3 replacement project and the Trans Mountain, we set up Indigenous advisory monitoring committees. So these committees are composed of equally of tribal representation and the federal government. And they've set up to monitor progress on both of these projects to pin that against the conditions that were set up for these projects to move forward. So it's an innovative model. Do these committees agree always? No, but this does provide a venue by which concerns can be addressed and aired. And I would also note that the government of Alberta has established the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, and that will backstop up to $1 billion of Indigenous investment into energy projects. And then finally, Rachel mentioned Equal by 30, and that's been another key project for Canada. May mark the second anniversary of the Equal by 30 campaign, which we co-launched with Sweden in 2018 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. And under that, signatories have committed to take action to close the gender gap by moving the dial on equal pay, equal leadership, and equal opportunities by 2030. And why do we do this? Research has shown that energy companies with diversity in leadership show higher profits, greater innovation, and lower risk. And yet women represent just 23% of energy sector employees and 18% of energy sector executive roles. And this is significantly lower than almost any sector. So there's a lot of work we have to do here. And so we're continuing on encouraging more companies and organizations to join Equal by 30 and make these commitments. Again, those are three examples of inclusivity and how we can apply that to these big challenges we're facing. So happy to take questions on this or any other aspect. Thanks.
Aaron, thank you so much. A great summary. And there are questions appearing already on chat. I think we will go to the other panelists. Hamid, would you like to take 7 to 10 minutes to give your perspective?
Sure, I want to share the screen.
Great, we can see it.
You can see it. So
Yeah.
so I share the screen. My screen looks much nicer than me, but it's it's also the I'm a professor. I have to teach from these screens. My name is Hamid Rastapur, as I mentioned. I'm at IIT, and what you see here, on the left-hand side, the picture of IIT. Let me move. I have to put it on this. Okay, let me move on. Is the my presentation is Pathway to Sustainable Society. Although the pathway is global, but a lot of problems should be resolved locally. That's the reason close collaboration with Canada and Mexico is essential in order to do that. Basically, as you see, the sustainability have 3 pillars of economics, environment, and social, and expected to bring reliability, security, affordability of energy, materials, food, and water. We are divided into our approach 3: short-term, transition, and the long-term. Short-term basically is a lot of energy conservation, energy efficiency, and management. Transition is basically the going from today's situation to the future renewable energy, which we have 2 bridges to our opinion as far as energy is concerned. One is natural gas, which was mentioned by Melanie first day, and the other one is the nuclear, which are mentioned by Dan. And these 2 will take us to the future sustainable society, which is fueled by the renewable energy. Of course, we should have the international energy policy and implementation plan that the people take care of that. So I wanted to mention one of the issues is that as we convert to more renewable energy, the population will grow, and the quality of life, or according to Professor Chu, is the human development is proportional to the energy consumption. Therefore, the energy needs is going to be double and triple. These are the steps I put together. I want to focus on technical one. I'm a technical person. I think at the short term, I'm going to talk about a few of them: microgrid, energy efficiency, sustainable food production, carbon capture. I will elaborate a little bit, and issues related to the water management or the materials that are important, and we should do a lot. At the transition, besides natural gas and nuclear, biofuel play a significant role, and need for water and desalinations or treatment is going to the major contribution. Another thing is that we have to put major infrastructure change and connectivity between the natural gas or hydrogen and water and electricity and food. And this connectivity will help us a lot. Sometimes connectivity is not a good idea, like in coronavirus, the connectivity of the world to bring it to everywhere. But most of the time, believe it or not, this connectivity is very important to enhance the efficiency. The long term is going to be renewable, solar, geothermal energy, and the wind. And at the middle of that is energy storage that I'm going to elaborate on that. Again, we have to have a lifetime accountability for all the material that we are using. If you want further information, I put one of my references at the bottom of the page. The climate change, everybody talk about climate change. Professor Chu talked about the history, and Dr. Dorsey said about climate injustice or the climate crisis, and also the Christopher Gold of Exxon talk about the impact. I just don't want to say anything else about that except this figure, which if you can see, this shows a small difference on the average. If we shift the average, if you just look at the temperature or anything average, a small shift on average will get a huge shift on the extremes. So it means the places have been raining a lot will rain more, the places which are cold, which is much colder. And this effect is very critical. It's not uniformly distributed around the world. That is a very critical one. The places that really are bad become worse. The other thing is that because of that, 10 years ago, we established this place called WISER. It's called Wagner Institute for Sustainable Energy Research. Doesn't mean that we are wiser than the other people, but it's the institute we established. And the goal of this institute is a horizontal one. We work with everybody, with from the lawyers and the businessmen and the engineers, scientists, everybody, we work with them. And the thing that we are focusing on combating is a climate change and water shortage. And our approach is least cost strategy to minimize carbon. This is the least cost strategy is very, very critical because otherwise would not be accepted by the society. And WISER collaborate with a lot of people, with a lot of outside, inside, with our faculty. We are 85 faculty from different departments involved. And these are the problems that has to be solved interdisciplinarily and with a lot of participation. And we are collaborating with a lot of universities like UIC and also the industry. Let me give you a few examples of this technical approach to sustainability. The biggest one is CO2 emission. CO2 is, if you look at this figure here, it shows that on the left-hand side, the CO2 which is generated by fossil fuel compared to the fuel by getting rid of the forestry areas. Or if you look at that, the one we generate, but it's much higher than that. It doesn't mean that there are not other resources or so on. But there are other resources like come from the agriculture and so on, I mentioned in detail by Melanie first day. The second one is the figure that I wanted to show you. This figure on the right-hand side is the figure which shows in 2019 for the first time consumption of the coal. It exactly matches the consumption of the renewable energy, total renewable energy. That's a good start, and it's going to go further. The point is that if we use the coal, we produce much more CO2 than oil, less than natural gas. Therefore, any conversion to natural gas will really a good first step towards sustainability. CO2 capture is very important. We are doing CO2, we can capture it, CO2 at the end of the pipe, which when the CO2 comes at about 12%, or we can capture it inside when we generate CO2 and enhance the hydrogen production. It's called IGCC. So CO2 capture was mentioned by a lot of previous speakers, by Ryan, Jamal, and Elena as one of the pillars of the net zero energy. That's an important thing that we do. The other, and as you see, I put some animation house. Okay, if you look at the sequestration, the CO2 that we capture and we concentrate it from 12% to 85%, we can inject it to the ground or to the sea. And when injected to the ground, what will happen? The first few years, less than 10 years, are very critical. The reason is that it has to be trapped. After that, the capillary and the other capillaries and the solubility, and then it becomes mineral. So it's not a big deal. This is a very interesting picture that shows how the first few years is play a critical role. Other things is talks about by the plenary lecture as about the microgrid or smart grid. Microgrid, basically, we did it at IIT, one of the first universities in the United States, is basically managing the grid. Grid cannot be smart, or we can manage it a smart way, such a way that we put it in the loop and would not try that the blackout cascade through. So, and also we identify the most important critical part, and those critical part is going to be there. Means that we put the new resources of the renewable, like a solar and wind or something, to provide that one with the appropriate energy storage. The other thing is the transition in natural gas. I got to tell you, in this part of the world, there are tremendous amount of natural gas, not only in the tight formation that we do the fracturing, known as the fracked gas. That's very little. The biggest, the most important one is in hydrates, which 1% of the trapped in hydrates is equivalent to 100 years of today consumption of the United States. But there is no free lunch because all these sands are glued together by hydrate. As soon as we start producing, the sand start to be produced. It's a huge challenge to produce hydrates. Also, if we leave the methane released to the atmosphere is much worse than CO2. So it's a very critical and very important thing. And natural gas is play a significant role in the years to come. As I said, biofuel mentioned by the other, we are competing in biofuel. We should not compete with the food and with the agriculture. That's the problem with the biofuel. That's the reason our focus is in algae, which doesn't need the clean water, because to our opinion, water already in a lot of places in the world is much more expensive and valuable quantity than oil or energy. Water, we don't want to have water and use the clean water to grow things, grow our energy. That's not economical. Sounds. The wind also, there's a lot of, if we have the wind in the nice area, place, beautiful and constant wind, that's great. But life is not like that. There are rain, there are hail, snow, wind, and this fluctuation will cause fluctuation in the power production. As we see in this figure, there is a fluctuation in the power production. And this fluctuation can be done thanks to the computational fluid dynamic advances in the computers, which enable us to forecast and calculate these things. Solar energy also, we can, one is that using the solar energy as a power generation directly. This is roof of one of the building at IIT. The other one is concentrated solar. I think we can concentrate solar. This is the cartoon of making the steam and spin around the turbine. But in general, we can concentrate it on the media. This shows some simulations of concentrated of solar in a packed bed. And this, we can transfer that and use this energy. Basically, most of the chemical, pharmaceutical, biological processes which need heat can use the concentrated solar. I think this is one of the future sources that we have. Energy storage. Of course, we can do it mechanically, flywheel. We can pump the water up and down. We can do battery. I won't say anything about the battery, but in front of George. But it's I'm focusing on new areas. According to Professor Chu, Secretary Chu, it's important that we find out new storage. And this is a thermal storage on the right-hand side. It's going to be new, and we need a lot of innovation from all these young people who are listening to come up with the new, something that we can store it and get it many months down the road. So that's the very critical. And with all respect to my friend George, battery cannot solve all the problems. It doesn't matter how much advances we made on a battery, but it solves its own share.
I mean, I fully agree with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me say some concluding remark. I think that advances that we make in the experimental, measuring things and a fraction of seconds, and also advanced computational enable us to make major contribution or pathway towards sustainable society. I think it's very important that we lobby and enhance the research, fundamental research in this area. Of course, I didn't give you any silver bullet. There is no silver bullet to solving energy issues. It's a global one, but it's a function of location, time, technology, lifestyle. We need a paradigm shift, the way we think, the way we live. Maybe according to Secretary Chu, we got to better come up with a different definition of the wealth. I don't know, but I know that we have to make a fundamental thinking and fundamental change in lifestyles. Decarbonizations is a crucial way to move forward, but it should be in the much broader context of connecting to the water security, food availability, and well-being of human beings. That's a very important. And interlink between the technical, economical, environmental, and social factor, basically essential. Thank you.
Hamid, that was an amazing summary. Obviously, you've watched the whole week and
Yes.
brought in what the other speakers have said very, very nicely. Thank you for that. Let's turn now to John Brogley. Would you like to give your perspective?
Yes, well, good morning. My name is John Brogley. I'm the Water Director at Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, and I'm a chemical engineer as well. I'm just going to share my screen if I could.
Sure.
And have just a short slide deck. Okay, so hopefully you can see that.
Yes, that's good. We got it.
Okay, perfect. So I'm here to talk to you about COSIA, or Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, as a catalyst for clean technologies in the oil sands. So we were formed in 2012. And of course, page down isn't working, is it? No. Okay. There we go. And so we're an alliance of oil sands producers focusing on accelerating environmental performance improvement in Canada's oil sands through collaborative action and innovation. And so on the left-hand panel, you see the 4 areas of focus that we have: greenhouse gas emissions, reducing those, reducing and improving water use, reclaiming the land faster and disturbing less land, and turning tailings, that's just for the mining sector, into a resource. And so what the slide doesn't talk about is each of those 4 areas is formed by joint venture agreements that run over 100 pages. And the reason I mention that is because these joint venture agreements are have a lot of detail in them, because what makes COSIA different than many industry associations is that those 8 members you see, BP, Canadian Natural, Cenovus, ConocoPhillips, Imperial, which is mostly owned by ExxonMobil, Suncor, Teck, and Syncrude, those 8 members have agreed through these joint venture agreements to share intellectual property. So they don't give away their intellectual property, they grant free use rights. And so that is something that's very unique. So whether one of those companies works on a project, or they all work on it collaboratively, or there's some subset of them working on a project to improve environmental performance, ultimately all of the results are shared with all of the members. And the idea, of course, is to move much faster and accelerate environmental performance improvement by working together that way. So in terms of what's been shared so far, so this isn't the value of the technologies, because we don't try and value them, it's too difficult. This is just the cost to develop the technologies that those 8 members have shared between each other. So that's about $1.4 billion since 2012, over 1,000 technologies that make up that $1.4 billion that have been shared between the members. Currently, we have 294 active projects at a cost of about $773 million. So in terms of GHG innovation, I'm the water director, so I'm certainly not as expert in this as Matt McCullough, our GHG director, but GHG pathways, I'm going to talk about in a second, but greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced in the oil sands by 24%. This is intensity, by 24% since 2012, and a further reduction of 20 to 27% is expected by 2030. And so kind of the 5 innovation pathways for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are carbon capture, conversion, and storage. And I'm going to talk about one of those projects, a conversion project, in a second. And while I'm on that topic, by the way, I should mention that Canadian Natural, who's our largest producer, is also the 5th largest industrial it has the 5th highest capacity for CCS in the world, and is the largest CCS industrial player in Canada. So second pathway is natural gas decarbonization, then energy efficient design, fugitive emission measurement and management, and reinventing the extraction process. And that involves using less water and using solvents, which, because the water has to be heated to in the extraction process. And so if you use solvents, you use less water and less heat. So it has a fairly dramatic impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So I'll just close by mentioning one project of the many that we could talk about. And it's an interesting one because it's a cross-border one.
So I sat down for 2 hours with Doug, and he helped me a lot with the survey. So now it is in a better format. So
I hear somebody else.
Yeah, hang on a minute. Thomas, could you mute Sefer? It looks like it's Sefer.
So now I guess
Okay.
There we go.
Oh,
sorry for the interruption, John.
Yeah, not to worry. So this Energy COSIA Carbon X Prize. So it's a 5-year project testing innovations to convert CO2 emissions into valuable products and generate revenue. At the moment, we're well into the program. It's now down to 10 teams from 5 different countries. The total prize is $20 million, and it's split equally, $10 million to natural gas, and that's the stuff that COSIA is interested in, and NRG is interested in the coal piece. And so there's 5 natural gas technologies being tested at a research facility near Calgary, where I am. And on the coal side for NRG, the test facility there is near Gillette, Wyoming. So I think that's the last of my slides. So welcome any questions.
That's great, John. Thanks so much for that great overview. And water, of course, is central to everything, so we can't leave it out of the equation at all. Let's turn to Deborah Philbrick, our last panelist from the MacArthur Foundation. Deborah, would you like to give a perspective maybe from the Foundation's point of view?
Yeah, thank you so much, George, and thanks all of you fellows. I don't know if anybody else needs to like shake it out a little bit. I understand that I am the last speaker on the last day, so I'm sure that there's been a lot of sitting. So the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, about 5 years ago is when we reimagined what our programs look like. We were, I think, in 12 program areas before that. And I loved that the idea of this week was around gigaton problems, because the way that MacArthur and a lot of other foundations frame a lot of what they're doing right now is in terms of these big bets. So 5 years ago, we decided that we were going to tackle climate change, specifically climate solutions. And so focusing in on that big bet is how this was born. And specifically, our goal is to keep global warming levels below that 2 degrees Celsius increase. And by doing that, we focus on the three largest and what we think are the most consequential countries: the United States, India, and China. And over the last 5 years, the foundation has awarded 157 grants to 90 different organizations in the total cost of about $300 million. And so it's not a small investment, although that investment certainly dwarfs when you think about the amount of money that the fossil fuel industries are kind of pumping into the other side of things. We do this through a few different approaches. The first one being that we have squarely focused on mitigation over the last 5 years, and we've also pretty squarely focused on the energy sector, the power sector, depending on how you are framing it. And we do that through 5 different approaches. One is expanding funding opportunities within the philanthropic community, so really trying to connect people together. Expanding markets for carbon, and our friends to the north are certainly leading the way in terms of carbon taxes. The third is by broadening climate solution coalitions and improving partnerships. The fourth, which I haven't heard a lot about today, but we certainly cannot ignore, is altering the political discourse. I would say that, the United States, which is primarily where my portfolio lies, and I would say the best part of my job is that I get to interact with all of these organizations who are really doing the science and executing on its findings and kind of changing the hearts and minds of people who do not yet believe that global warming is an issue. So making sure that that our elected leaders understand the scope of the problem is certainly a piece of it. And then last but not least, advancing climate-friendly policies and regulatory actions. And I mentioned that my portfolio is in the United States. A lot of that work is happening in the Heartland here in Chicago, which is where we are based. And I would be remiss if I didn't pull together one other piece of it, which is that the Heartland is also incredibly consequential for this intersection between racial justice and climate justice. You know, the Heartland is the place where both Michael Brown and George Floyd were killed, and I see that as one of the hopefully long-standing advancements in the climate philanthropy space and in the climate space in general, is understanding that addressing these issues of equity is not just a means to an end, but it is truly an immovable block, and we are not going to be able to get where we need to on advancing climate solutions unless we also address some of those social inequities as well. And I know that we are coming up on time, and I want to leave plenty of room for conversation. So I will stop there.
Deborah, thanks so much. I know you've been following everything on chat. I see you've contributed to the chat, so that's wonderful. And let's get to some questions. I think, Louis, you had several questions. Would you like to choose your favorite and maybe pose it to the panelists?
Yeah, thank you, George. So my original question I sent out was, so everybody understands like the sense of where I'm coming from, was about whether or not a collaboration between the water resources, the energy resources, the food resources, all those like essential sectors, to kind of update the infrastructure so that we can make the most efficient infrastructure possible. And I don't know if that would be more beneficial, or the separate pathways that it seems most countries have been implementing for however long until now. From that development, and Aaron and Deborah, thank you guys for your answers. Aaron brought up the idea of microbial life being used in water treatment for converting CO2 in the atmosphere to oxygen within the atmosphere. So I was just wondering if John at CASIA, if you had any like updates about that kind of work, or if you guys have been trying to push that initiative.
Yeah, so I'll make a couple of comments there. And in terms of interacting with other sectors and being more integrated, we recently out of Calgary launched a Clean Resource Innovation Network, and that's actually led by Joy Romero. I used to work for Joy while I was at Canadian Natural. And its focus is that very thing of looking at collaboration between the agricultural sector and the industrial sector. Just a simple example in terms of water use. Fortunately, the oil sands is in a very water-rich area. There's lots of fresh water. The oil sands are. So in the north of Alberta, almost all the water is there and very little of demand. In the south, almost all the people are there with most of the demand. And so if you were concerned about conserving water, you'd spend your money much better and more wisely by putting pipelines instead of irrigation ditches in the south than worrying about reducing the water use in the oil sands, which is very small compared to how much is there. But those are some of the conversations you get into. It's a very difficult thing to do, but we are working on it. In terms of the microbes, what I will say is these aren't ones that are converting CO2 to oxygen. And unfortunately, they're ones that we're using to clean up tailings pond water. And so that particular one that's mentioned is a company out of the Netherlands called OPE. And they're a startup out of the University of Delft in the Netherlands. And we're doing work with them to train microbes to treat that water. So,
great answer. Let's see, Sada, you also had several contributions to the chat. Would you like to talk maybe about meeting the Paris goals, or another topic would be fine too?
Yeah, thanks all the panelists for sharing the presentations. I was wondering, it was great to listen how oil and gas is coming up with innovations and policy changes. That's really new. But if we look at the emissions per capita, it's Canada's is higher than US, which is like the poster child for all the consumerism and emissions per capita, like US is always mentioned. And even if we look at the absolute emissions, it doesn't look like Canada is on the way to meet its Paris goals. And considering the new UNEP reports, are there any plans to increase those goals?
Would somebody like to respond? Okay, Aaron, yeah, good.
Yeah, sure, happy to respond. Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's right. We do have a bit of work to do to meet our 2030 emissions target, and that's going to be a challenge. And the economic recovery, frankly, won't make that any easier. But we are in the process of working on a clean fuel standard that's not in place yet, but it is something that is being rolled out. And I think generally we do have different emissions challenges than the US. I mean, I know the US power sector is a big challenge, which is significantly less the case in Canada, whereas it's our industrial emissions that are really the challenge, and where we need to focus some of our efforts. So yeah, definitely some work to do.
Great, thank you. Melody, you had a question about direct air capture. Melody, are you there?
Hi.
Oh, good.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, could you repeat what?
You in the chat, you mentioned something about direct air capture, and I wonder if the panelists, if you might like to ask your question, and the panelists might like to comment.
Right. So I came across this technology that was rather new a few years back. It's called zero mass solar. It's a type of solar panel that allows the direct capture of air and then transforming it to drinking water. Do you see any possibility of it being commercialized, and also whether there's any opportunities for that technology to be in especially developing countries without much infrastructure? I have another question regarding eco-industrial park as well. Sure. It's been discussed that it's a way for industry, businesses in the industry to come together and reduce wastage and also increase resource efficiency. Do you know of any examples, success examples in Canada or in the US? Thank you.
Okay, panelists, 2 questions. Anyone like to step up to the plate and,
I can do the first one. Is really we are talking about the grabbing the moisture from the air and condensing in the water. Yes, it's feasible, but it's not something which I don't know it has been commercialized or not. I know few experiments has been done, and also few experiment on capturing CO2 from the air. These are all, both of them have their own challenges, and also there are also opportunities at the same time.
Yeah, I would add on to that. I'm not familiar with that specific technology, but I agree that one, we need more investment in those types of technologies to try to get it moving, but we also have to be realistic that we are on a 10-year time frame. And so the mass deployment of that technology in the next 10 years requires that we also deploy the technologies that we already have. We just helped get a report out the door called the 2035 report that shows that kind of with current battery or solar and storage technology that we already have, we can get the United States to 90% of the clean electricity that we need by 2035, so in the next 15 years. And so then that makes the last 10% a lot easier. And I think that sometimes people get sometimes people get a little bit ahead of themselves or in their own way, trying to think about how you're going to get all the way to 100% without just taking the steps forward that we need to piece by piece, since we needed to get started yesterday.
Great comment. And another panelist like to comment on either of those questions? So we're getting close to the end, and I'd like to pose a question for the panelists, and maybe Deborah, especially for you. We hear a lot about cross-sector interaction when it comes to fighting climate change. And I wonder if you or the other panelists would like to say how we can, well, what's the benefit of that, and how can we maybe accelerate the cross-sector interaction in fighting climate change?
Yeah, so we support organizations that do a lot of private sector engagement, which can include everything from holding Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies accountable for the commitments that they have made. I think that it's, we definitely have a big tent approach in that we want to see everybody in kind of whatever form they want to and can get involved in this. I think the cross sector is deeply important. I also think that sometimes there's these arbitrary lines that are drawn there. So some people might say, I'm just interested in transportation. What does that really mean? That means that, how is that fuel going to be developed to get that diesel bus that should be an electric bus where it needs to be? And so I think that if we are a little bit more graceful with how we approach the things that we are interested in, I think also that extends to mitigation as well. We traditionally have had a very mitigation focused process, but then when you think about developing countries and what that means in terms of energy access, we have to be realistic about the fact that you're not going to bring cooling to India without adding to the electric load in some cases. And so I think that, no, we are not going to get where we need to go by, staying in our lane, whichever lane that is that we have chosen. And so I think that cross-sector collaboration is very important.
Wow, nice answer. Other panelists like to comment on that.
I just want to make a comment. We need a carrots, means that resources for people to motivate them to work together. And also the much more implemented international policy and the guidelines that people move around that guidelines. Without that, is going to be some kind of, according to chemical engineer, amorphous system.
Good word. Thanks, Hamid. Other panelists, we have time for everyone to make a short comment if you'd like.
Yeah, it's Aaron, and I apologize. I have back-to-back, so I'm going to have to excuse myself. I just wanted to say thank you all for listening, and also thank you to my fellow panelists. I think it's been a great discussion, and I see that I have a question from Barbara, and I'll work through Thomas offline to follow up with you on that. So thanks again, everyone. Good luck in your program.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. Let's see. Thank you, Aaron. I'm sorry, I got your name wrong. Maybe we should close the panel now. It is actually 11 o'clock in Chicago. So thanks to the panelists, really exciting topic. Lots of engagement with the fellows, lots of engagement with your own perspectives, which I think everyone appreciated. And clearly this is one of the most important topics that we as a society need to deal with. So I'm going to officially adjourn the panel. Again, wonderful discussion. Will the fellows please stay, because we have another session that will have to do with the projects they've been working on. So, and I think everyone is welcome to stay if you wish to listen to what the fellows have to say. Eric, do you want to? Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye,
Yeah,
Amit.
thanks so much. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Yeah, why don't we check in with Thomas, and then we'll lead from there. Thomas, do you want to give everybody just a second to step away and grab some water, or what would you like, Thomas?
No, we just keep plugging right along.
Boy, we're tough.
I run a tight ship, y'all. It's been a little
You
loose
run a
here,
tight
but it's tight. We're gonna wrap it up now.
Okay. All right. Any of the fellows, if you need to, just do what you got to do, but we're going to keep going. Like Thomas said, there you go, Louis. Thank you. All right. Well, that was great. Welcome to the 5th and final day of the 10th annual SISE conference. This has been amazing. I am really sorry. The American Energy Society has never been part of that, the in-person event. And I'm sorry, Katie, that we missed it. I have a feeling it would have been a heck of a party tonight. I think SISE would have taken over Chicago. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry we missed it. Hopefully we can reconvene, George and Thomas, next year, because I want to party with 10th annual. Oh my goodness.
I have really great videos from 2012 where people were out partying in the streets. So I'm looking at my alumni from 2012.
Yeah, that might have set the standard, but 10th annual, forget it. This group would take them down. It's over. All right, back to the work. Louis, I'll be leading to you pretty soon. So yeah, good idea, Louis. To convey the importance of the maps that you guys worked on, I'm going to turn to Isaac Newton, who once said, "I can see farther by standing on the shoulders of giants." What you've done with your maps, you've built giant shoulders for others to stand on. Now everyone can see farther. The UN identified the Midwest as the most crucial region in the world to battle and stave off climate change. Basically, if we can figure it out in the Midwest, we can figure it out anywhere. Your maps help lead the way. You also have made important corrections to the way people think about and talk about energy. In this age of social media, everyone has an opinion, too many opinions. Too often these opinions are uninformed and lack evidence. Your maps are the evidence that energy professionals need to think more deeply and more analytically. Your maps are helping the world. I've had the honor of taking a sneak peek at your maps, by the way, and I've started thinking about it. And your maps have helped me make some corrections to the biases I've had and have allowed me to actually gain a deeper understanding of these maps. Louis is going to lead us into a much deeper analysis, and George, not only critical thinking, but solutions-oriented critical thinking too. But I'd like to give us just a head start, Louis, if you don't mind. This is my takeaway when I just glance just momentarily at your maps. Team Des Moines, you shed light on a vital net energy producing region that the rest of the world ignores. Think of how that applies to the rest of the world. It's not just Des Moines. How many other net energy producing regions are there out there that we ignore? Team Indianapolis, from my perspective, I'm starting to think about Indianapolis in ways I never have. You've identified dangerous energy deficiencies, to be quite honest. Team Twin Cities, you've shown us an energy region with great disparities, haves and have-nots, a region out of balance. Team Madison, I call this region the little engine that could. Here's a region that seems to be overachieving. Again, these are just my first impressions. I'm looking forward to Louis, you guiding me. Push back, I'm looking forward to that. Team St. Louis, a region with enormous potential. And again, think about how that might apply to other places around the world. Team Kansas City, it looks like a first mover region preparing for tomorrow's energy today. Team Milwaukee, it looks like a region in search of its energy soul. You're taking us beyond assumptions and to more informed opinions about what we need to do, about how to think about this gigaton challenge. I'm going to start you off, Louis. I'm going to ask the fellows, at least those who are live right now. Some of you are on static mode. Shana, I see your cat. So your cat's going to get to vote for you, Shana. I'm just going to do one activity. I'd like all the fellows, here's what I'd like you to do. Use your hand to show me if the mapping project was harder, about what you expected, or easier than you thought. So harder, above, high, about what you expected, easy or easier than you thought. So when you were digging into the map, was it harder? Please put your hands up there. Katie, take a screenshot if you can. Shana, you and your cat get 2 votes. It looks like Shana, okay, Suzanne's got it. In fact, she's got it above the camera. All right. Okay, Katie, did you get a screenshot? Do you notice? I don't see, did anybody say easier than you thought?
Yeah, I'm not seeing that either.
I'm not
That's
seeing either.
very interesting. Yeah.
That's good though. That's good.
Very good,
It's,
yeah.
because it's not easy. Because it's not easy. Louis, you ready?
I am ready. I'm really excited for this.
Good. They did an awesome job. Awesome job. Go ahead, Louis. And Katie's going to drive, right?
Yes, to help us show the maps. And I'd love to lead this discussion in 3 parts. First of all, looking over our hard work, these end products, and looking over these maps. And I'd love to ask a few questions about them. Then the second part would be a reflection on our work. And the third part, asking questions of each other and also the leaders of our conference this week about the work that we've done and what we've experienced. So, but first, I'd love to run through all the maps so everyone in the audience gets to see our hard work. And fellows, as we do this, please think about your region, but also study the other regions as we pass through them. And I have a few questions that I want you guys to think about as we move through them, and then answer them once we get through, because I want you guys to take a look at all of them and think about it. And we're a very creative and intelligent group of fellows. So think about what might make your answer different than what other fellows have to say as well. So the first question, though, to think about is, what does the visualized data tell us? We've witnessed how powerful, well-communicated or visualized data can be, and we've talked a ton about what story is the data telling us. What does it tell us? So think about what the visualized data tells us when we see it in front of us. The second question
Katie,
is...
Zoom in, Katie, into that map if you can. Good, Louis, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, the second question is, think about the work that you did and your team did, or maybe you live in one of these areas, but what were you expecting after your hard work, or maybe living in this area, versus what are you surprised by when you take a look at this map? So think about that. Does it look empty? Does it feel empty to you? Or does it properly represent the region? Is it more full than you ever thought? And the third question is, where can you see room for improvement? What is your city or region, as we scroll through, where is there room to grow? What are we missing? What colors do you think will show up more and more as we accomplish our goals towards decarbonization or sustainability goals in general? So I'll repeat those 3 questions as we move through. The first one is, what does the visualized data tell us? The second one was, what were you expecting versus what you're surprised by? And the third one is, where do you see room for improvement? So we'll quickly scroll through these maps, think about these things, and also Eric and Thomas, as we're going through, if I could get some help picking out people who maybe haven't spoken before, that would be great. So let's look at these maps. This is Chicago. So take a look at the Chicago energy ecosystem.
And Louis, you tell me if you want me to pull out a certain map or you want me to point at anything in particular, okay?
Yeah. Just think about the Chicago energy system and then ecosystem, and then maybe we can move to the next one.
All right.
Louis, 2 quick things. Could somebody post those questions in the chat, and then I'll monitor. You can either raise your hand using the raise hand function, or just say, I have a comment in the chat, and then we can call on you that way.
Hey, Louis, you're going to go, that's great. And then Louis, you're going to go alphabetical so the teams can be ready, right? So
yes.
The teams. All right, Des Moines, step up.
Louis, we already have comments. Do you want to go ahead and take them, or do you want to wait a minute?
I'd love to look at all of the maps first, maybe.
Gotcha. All right, Sada, keep your hand up.
More.
Katie, can you zoom in some more? Is that okay? Sorry, Katie.
I was just trying to keep it within the region we were investigating.
Yeah.
We can move to the next one.
Well, wait, hey, Louis, do you mind? Do you want to keep going, or do you want somebody from Des Moines to comment? I'd love to hear what they think. What were they surprised by? What do they wish they saw more of? I'm just curious. Is that okay, Louis?
Sure, yeah, that works great.
Des Moines, you guys are probably some of the foremost experts on that region in the world now. Truly.
Shreya, are you from Des Moines, and do you have a comment?
Oh no, I was just gonna ask like a general question. I was just gonna say a general comment for like the visualization. I was just looking at it and just seeing how like in terms of like segregated cities like Chicago too, it's just interesting to see how like you can see in certain neighborhoods there aren't much as energy sectors or like ventures out as spread out as I would have hoped it to be, but I think that was like one of the interesting things I noted. That was pretty much it.
That's good. That's good.
Great comment, Shreya. Hey, Sada, since we're still moving between maps, did you want to ask your question and or make your comment?
Yeah, I had a general comment as well. Coming from the California bubble, I was really surprised to see so many startups and companies working in the energy industry. And I just plotted all of these data points on like which cities have which sectors, and was surprised to see solar and oil and gas was one of the highest numbers.
What do you think about that, Sada? What do you think about those two being so dominant over everything else?
Yeah, oil and gas, I did expect to be big in Midwest, but solar was the highest in, I did some assumptions, but still solar came on top, so was surprised by that.
Would you like to see a wider base? Would you like to see more? Or do you think that we should be concentrating on one? I mean, what do you think?
I'm not very sure because I don't know how to use this data directly. Like we can draw some accurate conclusions from it, but I think it's a good start to help people come to a single platform and collaborate. That's it.
Hey, Louis, what do you think? Louis, should we, Des Moines?
Yeah, I'd love to see the next map if we could.
Okay.
To say one thing very quickly, I was surprised with Des Moines because Cedar Rapids had quite a bit more than I expected. And although it was outside of the range, we included it because that was an indicator of an area we need to further investigate. So thank you. That was a big revelation for me.
Is there anybody else from the Des Moines team that would be able to say, if you were a benevolent dictator and could make one change, what would you do in Des Moines, in the energy ecosystem? Team Des Moines. Do we have anybody from Team Des Moines?
Can I jump in for a second? I'm from Des Moines. I didn't make any comment in the chat, so I'll just jump in. So when I searched for lighting sector, I couldn't find any. I'm not sure if it's because the most popular industry in Des Moines might be like more agriculture maybe, so that's why I couldn't find any lighting company in the energy sector. Yeah.
And if it's that's an interesting point, because lighting does contribute to the GHG and energy consumption. They're missing, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Good, Louis.
I think Valerie has a hand up.
I was also part of the Des Moines sector, and I was looking more at environmental remediation. And I guess it didn't really come to me that so many companies use energy or have an energy basis. For example, I found something that dealt with mold removal. At first thought, how is mold similar to energy? But at the time, I didn't realize that there's so many different interconnected factors with that, and that each item, although it may seem at first that there's no connection, might actually have something or a clue to something further.
I assume you're saying you'd like to see more, or were you pleased to see so much?
I actually would like to see more. I kind of think that, although this is a really, really good start, and I think it'll be very, very useful in the future, I just think that there were so many different other companies or things that I came across that unfortunately weren't in the area, that just because the Midwest is so promising, it'd be really nice to maybe next year or in future sectors have similar communities around the Midwest region. For example, I'm from Michigan, and I would really like to see how different things play into that, and are there connections with Des Moines or Minneapolis or something like that? Just kind of compare think it'd be kind of an interesting direction to take.
That's great, Valerie. Thank you. That's really, thank you.
Can we see the next ecosystem? Thank you. So here we have Indianapolis. And perhaps instead of holding on to those answers, maybe if someone from the Indianapolis team wants to talk about or answer one of those 3 questions I posed, we want to move in that direction.
I would say something.
I'm sorry.
I was on the Indianapolis team.
Yeah.
One thing I was surprised about, and maybe you guys remember I asked this question about, can we go outside the borderlines? Because I just kept stumbling upon things just right outside that yellow line, these NGOs, these farming businesses that were really supporting the city in their energy and their sustainability and their connections. So I thought that was pretty interesting on the power of not being so centralized, but
Rose, that's a great observation. I don't know what to make of that. That's unusual, I think, and I don't know what to make of that. We'll have to account for that.
I have a thought, and it's like I keep trying to get my parents who have retired to move to Indiana, so they'll be closer to me. But I keep telling them to move close to Indianapolis, but don't move into the city because I know it's going to be too expensive for them. But if they live outside the city, it might be more affordable. So I'm wondering if maybe the reason they're outside the city is because it's cheaper to hold their business, but they're close enough in proximity that they can continue to interact with the urban area as well.
Okay. Thomas and Rose, thank you. That changes the way I think, because my initial was deficiency. Sorry, somebody's talking. Louis, sorry.
Liz, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was actually Des Moines and couldn't figure out how to say this until Rose chimed in there. So we kind of had an opposite thing going on. My mom is from Des Moines, so I've like spent a lot of time there. And driving around, you can get really rural really fast. So as we were looking for stuff in Des Moines, like Chicago has a lot of suburbs, and like you go a long way from like Chicago city center, and there were tons and tons of dots, which probably more time has been put into that. But like most of what we had in Des Moines was really close to the city center, like a couple blocks of downtown, or like that Urbandale suburb. And then after that, it was like Ames and Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, which are like hours away. So we kind of had a very opposite thing that surprised me, because I expected kind of what Thomas said, that like it's cheaper, it's easier to get like office space, stuff like that. But we did not see the same spread that Indianapolis and Chicago have.
That's great, Liz. Wow.
Any other comments from Indianapolis? Mark.
Yes, thank you very much for these maps. So I actually work in this region, and to answer the first question that you posed, I think just by looking at these maps, you can easily tell what type of energy organizations are dominant in a particular region.
Yes.
And that's also a good indicator of what type of energy services you can have in a region. So for instance, in Indianapolis, you realize that there are so many yellow circles, which are solar energy companies. And I actually collected this data on solar. You realize that most of them are kind of medium-sized companies, and they offer rooftop solar services. So this is something that really made me to think that, wow, it means that there might be a lot of people, a lot of users who are now moving towards solar rooftop or solar home applications, because once these companies are like a lot, or there are many in this region, it means there is a need for their services. That is why they are dominant in that particular region. So I think the map can help to do this kind of analysis for different regions.
Hey, Thomas, that comment, I mean, I'm I was wrong. Louis, I was wrong. This is amazing. I had said dangerous deficiencies. Mark, that's a great comment. It's dispersed. It's more. So, Mark, you're saying it's more promising than you had anticipated. Is that what you're saying, Mark?
Yes, yes.
Wow, I was wrong.
I mean, I have a different comment. So, hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I worked in this region, and I agreed with Matt that they have a lot of solar energy system, but I didn't see much. I didn't see a lot of biofuels or manufacturing industry. I keep seeing it like outside of Indianapolis, like way outside of it. And I didn't see a lot of biofuels at all. So I feel like they need to kind of invest more on that in that.
Is it, do you pronounce, is it filet?
Yeah, Filati.
Filati. And your point is even deeper than that, right? Because there's, if you don't have what you just said, there aren't as many jobs, right? There's just not jobs.
Exactly. That's very correct. And even the biofuels company that I see, they are also involved in fossil fuels. They're involved in both.
Oh, really? Okay. So if you merge Mark's and your comment, Mark says there's more promise there than he anticipated, but we're lacking that baseline jobs. So it's wow.
Rose, I see your hand up before we move to the next ecosystem.
Yeah, I did a lot of the weird ones that wouldn't necessarily immediately be energy related, like media and just those ones. And I thought it was a lot of fun with, since Mark did his solar stuff first, I kind of was looking into their websites and then seeing if they've done any business with those like connecting stakeholders or businesses. So seeing like, oh, what radio station got solar panels through what solar panel company. So I thought that was like a fun connection just even before the map was made. And I was
so
like,
to those that have spoken, Louis, I'm so sorry. This is amazing. All right, now let's push it even further. Let's just say Biden wins and there's going to be that $2+ trillion injection of money. And Mark, your point about there's potential here, Filati, Rose, would you target this region? Is there potential to make a quick difference that spreads, or do you think you'd say let's hold back while it works its way out? I mean, is there need here?
I think it's worth the investment. I think there's definitely that spark that Indianapolis has, that could just tumble into a great energy power that they can have.
Awesome. Thank you. So here we have Kansas City. So what is the data telling us? The visualized data telling us, or what are we surprised by? Where's there room for improvement? Any hands?
Katie, it's more red and purple than the other places. I noticed. What is red? I don't even know. Well,
yeah, Eric, that absolutely occurred to me instantly. The color, and thanks for the visualization question, Louis. The color is different. Yeah. I'm wondering what it means.
Yes.
So it looks like those two are predominantly environmental remediation and oil and gas.
Wow.
And we can do that here.
Hey, George, that changes. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, how can we use these maps? One way would be to characterize each sub-ecosystem by its interest, and we have that information in the directory. So, yeah. Is it primarily, we were talking earlier in the week about its technology, its business, and its policy. So just a simple profile would be which one is dominant in each region. Is it a tech region? You know, is it a business region? Is it a policy region?
Katie, can you do solar while we're, Louis, I really look forward, push those Kansas City team. Can you do solar? I'm just curious if we're doing oil and gas and then a lot of people to clean it up, right? They're symbiotic, right?
Yeah.
Wow. It looked like Des Moines had more.
Kansas City team, does this feel right to you? Does it feel like what you were expecting when you were the guys you were the folks putting in this data? Does this feel right? Does it feel like we're seeing everything we should be seeing? Or I see one hand up from, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just start off the conversation. So I'm part of the Kansas City team, and then answering the questions. So it definitely felt like I was discovering more than I would think I would discover in Kansas City. Because like I have never been to Kansas City, but like after visiting St. Louis a couple of while ago, I can imagine it's kind of like it might be a vibrant city after all. But then like, because I was looking at the environmental remediation, environmental consulting, and there were definitely so many companies that were working in environmentals in Kansas City. And this is kind of like a side note that a lot of them are dealing with asbestos somehow. I didn't look into that more, but it's a fun note to have. And then something that struck to me was that maybe it's because like Kansas City is in between Kansas and Missouri, is that whenever I try to find things in Kansas City, it also leads me to things that are in Missouri, which is kind of far, but maybe it can help to see that there's a connection there. Like if you want to put something in Kansas City, you should see like also things that are in Missouri, St. Louis. But then I think because of the time constraint, we might haven't been able to see like the connections more in academia and like IoT, because I think I only found like one in Kansas City, but I don't know, there might be more. So yeah.
Can you do incubators, accelerators in Kansas City? And by the way, to the Kansas City team, and by the way, to all teams, if any of you are interested in earning some money, an honorarium, I know that Kansas City, there's a sponsor who's willing to pay, you know, a few $100s already to build this out a little bit more. So if you're interested, let Katie or me know. And I think it's, Louis, it applies to all the teams. Every region has somebody there that wants to see more. George, as we know, right, George? So
sure.
There are some honorariums money available.
Very cool. Can we see the next ecosystem? Thank you.
I'll have the little engine that could.
Here's Madison. So some folks from Madison, some gut feeling responses.
Isn't this the Beavers or something? What do they call themselves?
Yeah, something
Badger.
along those lines.
The Badgers.
Badger, Beaver.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Bugle.
Beaver, Badger, whatever. Sorry,
same difference.
If I could say something here, more ventures were identified than we expected. So that was impressive.
That's cool.
I think, I worked on Madison, and I think, oh, go ahead.
Well, Gabe, I'm so sorry. Can somebody explain the geography? Something's going on with this body. I've been there once. Does anybody from the Badger region? What is going on here?
Eric, I can step in on that. Between Mendota and Monona is where UW-Madison's campus is located, and also where the capital is. And so it makes sense a lot of ventures are centralized in that region.
Now, what do you think about that? Because Indianapolis, they pushed back on our original assumption, said, look, it's more dispersed, and that could be a good thing. It reaches wider instead of concentrated areas. So, you know, there are more winners potentially. What do you think? Is it too concentrated here? Oh, it looks spread out. What is your sense there? And then Gabe, sorry, Gabe.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know, Madison is like 100% a college city. Like it is so oriented around the campus. So I think to an extent, it makes sense to me that there's a lot going on in that area, but I also think that there is a lot of wealth in Madison and in the surrounding areas. And there's a lot of academia, like people who like to stay in the area. So they got to Milton, they got to Fitchburg. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity for ventures to start spreading out. But I think that just like my understanding of living in Madison, it makes sense that there's a lot around campus. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to spread, so.
Yeah, can I just jump in? I'm also one of the members in Madison ecosystem. I want to say that, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. From the Madison ecosystem, you can see it from the downtown area, then it's sort of a radial system, then it goes to the suburbs around Madison. And when you click solar, you will see, compared with solar and wind, solar is more popular and more focused in downtown area, but there is less wind. And also, biofuel is one of the incoming focuses in Madison. But you will see there are fewer biofuels. Well, why I mention this because Madison has tons of agri lands and they can use those food waste to produce biofuel, but they didn't. So it seems other places around Madison, they need to put more attention on biofuels and they need to collaborate academia area and biofuel organizations and industries, try to promote more biofuels. That's my thought from the ecosystem map.
I think that what the other group members were saying was really important, and especially about like the wind versus solar. I think I was working on wind, and I think that I struggled to find anything within the city really. There's one wind farm that's slightly outside, and I think that partly has to do, especially in comparison to solar, with the fact that most wind is utility scale, and so it's it's less customer facing, and so solar is going to have so many more of these things within cities because you have a lot of people trying to get that customer attention and engage with customers, and individual rooftops, whereas wind is oftentimes a much bigger investment that comes from an energy utility or a larger organization. And so I think it's interesting how that is obviously influencing these maps, and that we're seeing like a ton of solar. Like whoever said that they analyzed the amounts and the data and graphed it, I think that was really interesting. And it's like, I would also be curious to know, with all of that solar, I wonder how much, how many megawatts is that actually, right? Like, I think it would be an interesting comparison to see, because the one wind farm that's, anywhere near Madison is only 6 turbines, but it's already, a 10 megawatt wind farm, and it provides a lot of power for a large company in Madison, for Epic. And so I'd be interested to compare it in different ways, because I think that as I was doing this, I was like, why is there no wind? Why are there other things? And it's because in a city, even beyond solar, in a city, a lot of companies are looking to provide services and looking to, that's why they're there. And so I thought that was interesting. I was also really surprised by how the biofuel in Madison was crazy.
Katie, can you do storage? I want to see George's field. I want to see in Madison. George, that's storage in Madison.
Yeah, and that's another thought that comes to mind. There may be obvious gaps in the stakeholders column of each of these sub-ecosystems that they don't know about. Opportunities for startups, say, that are, it's just missing. It's a gap. That's an analysis.
It sounds like that's what Ming Xing said too, as well as Gabe, right, Gabe?
It would be great to have an analysis of all the ecosystems. I think the Midwest, everybody would like to know things like that. And how's it going to come out? It doesn't come out except through a mapping project like this one.
Louis, what do you think? Louis, you're taking the 30,000 foot view. What do you think, Louis?
I think that, well, I'm interested. I want to be able to get to all the ecosystems, and I have two, I think, interesting questions regarding where maps can be improved and also what we hope to see in the next 20 years. So I do want to make sure we get to those couple of questions.
I could step in on that, especially on how Madison could be improved. Madison is the capital of Wisconsin, and it's also has one of the biggest research universities in the world. But there's a disconnect between the knowledge in the university and the policies that policymakers in the capital make. So I'd be interested in how this map could be a potential bridge between legislators and academia, and as well as community members.
Wow.
Definitely.
Wow.
Should I go to Milwaukee?
Yep. Cool. Milwaukee team. What do we see? What do we feel?
Wow.
Some interesting stuff going on.
And for those who don't really know Milwaukee, it's about an hour to an hour and a half north of Chicago. It's about an hour and a half east of Madison, still located in Wisconsin. So just some geographic information.
And the biggest city in Wisconsin.
George, do you notice less red than Kansas City? Do you see that?
Good point. Yeah.
I could make a possible quick comment about that as well, because I was doing solar, and although there wasn't that many solar companies, while I was doing my research, article after article after article kept popping up about how Milwaukee's council, like city council, has been pushing solar like crazy for the past like 2 years now, since 2018. And they just have one of the companies, I believe it was Energis, or it was We Energies. That one actually just got a contract with the city council to build one of the biggest utility solar plants in the heart of Milwaukee across the US. And it was just one of the really cool things that I thought I found out about it, because they've been moving away from oil and gas and trying to push especially solar. And they also have two nuclear plants in Milwaukee itself, and then others that supplied energy, but I didn't list because they were like at least 2 hours outside.
Are we asking too much of solar in Milwaukee? I mean, I don't know. Is that just, should we be focusing on wind? I mean, I don't know the sun. I don't know the storage. Oh, there's more wind.
Yeah, I actually want to say some. Oh, unless you want to talk.
Okay, and yeah, I was just gonna kind of piggybacking off of the last comment. I found that when I was adding in things for storage, and this kind of goes off of We Energy with having things outside of the Milwaukee area. Multiple times I came across companies that supplied whatever it was, whether it was graphene or different materials or storage or solar type of stuff for the city of Milwaukee, but wasn't located in Milwaukee. So there were multiple times where I just had to abandon a potential data point because, they say, yep, we service Milwaukee, but it's not actually within that zone of where we could include on the map. So.
Yeah, I want to piggy off that as well, because I was looking for wind in Milwaukee, and I think I was talking to Gabe, and he said, because he did Madison, and I kept finding things about Renew Wisconsin, which was placed in Madison. So I also think We Energies, they were popping up everywhere on the Milwaukee map, just when we were looking at solar, wind. biofuel, nuclear. Yeah. So I think potential could be with We Energies, but I was personally doing more of like the built environment stuff as well. So, and I know I was helping Heidi with like the raw materials, and I think there was a lot as well in Milwaukee there too.
And those are jobs, right, Heidi and Amy? Those are jobs. That's good, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good base, right, Louis?
Yeah. Thank you. Any more comments on Milwaukee before we move on to?
I think Christina has one. She's just forgotten how to raise her hand in
chat. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I've done it before. I just can't seem to figure it out right now. I just wanted to make a comment. So I am from Madison. I go to school in Madison, but I did the Milwaukee ecosystem, and I really agreed with what Eric said when he was kind of doing his introductory remarks about like Milwaukee still trying to find like its energy soul, like what it's going to focus on. And I also agreed with the analysis that like Madison has a lot more ventures. Like Madison is very interested in environmentalism. Like they're one of the cities that pledged to be net zero by 2050, like one of the first cities. And so I just think that it was interesting when we were creating the ecosystem maps that considering the proximity and kind of the level of relationship Milwaukee and Madison have in Wisconsin, that we wouldn't consider them like one energy ecosystem. Because to me, and this is not to discredit the rest of the state, but like Milwaukee and Madison are like where things are happening in the state. Like they're kind of like our two like centralized points. And so I would be interested in thinking about them more as like one ecosystem that we could connect rather than these two separate entities.
Oh boy, thanks, Christina. That's a very good point.
Louis, I see your hand up. If you'd like to make a comment real quick.
Yeah, and I kind of just wanted to add a point to what Christina was saying with your remarks at the like beginning of this entire conference, Eric, and this morning as well. It seems like the number one thing, as if there's like a gap in an area, then of course like startups, accelerators, incubate, like all those should be moving to that area to try and like build up that area and capitalize. But on top of that, it seems like the number one thing, because a lot of these areas like Milwaukee and Madison kind of have a spread in diverse selective companies, ventures, etc. And it seems like the simple collaboration between academia and like how the city council of Milwaukee and We Energies are collaborating, and then say like the research being done in Madison and new storage startups for the Madison area. It seems like there needs to be more, and I'm not really sure how exactly to tackle that problem, but there needs to be
Louis, do you mind if I piggyback on what Louis is saying?
Go ahead.
So Louis, what you're saying is it's almost like each region has its own gaps and needs. And I think this is what all the fellows have said so far at Baldemaps, but every region has its gaps and needs. And it's almost like we need someone to call to arms, say, we've got a gap here. Universities, accelerators, policymakers, focus here.
Yeah, almost like a newsletter going out to like statewide college campuses and being like, if you guys have like an amazing idea, like Madison is a great place to start for storage or to start for wind. And then moving on to like how we're doing Pittsburgh, you know, just like something that could allow the majority of people coming out of college and like having those new ideas to kickstart it.
So do you realize, so Louis, you're standing on the shoulders of their fellow giants, right? I mean, this is an idea that just keeps going up. That call to arms kind of concept is a powerful decarbonization. We were talking about earlier on Wednesday in particular, what do we do? Much like you call to arms for political activism, call to arms to target these areas. That is a very, very powerful action item to decarbonize. That's gigaton decarbonize effort.
I just want to throw, so I think Louis and Mark earlier, and also Christina, like some things kind of piggybacking off with of the area. Lewis, you're talking about opportunities. Mark pointed out earlier, Indianapolis, if you look at the solar, it was primarily rooftop solar. And please tell me if I'm misquoting or misdirecting anybody. But like 2 potential opportunities for using the maps are, first of all, like looking at an area and asking, why is solar rooftop so big in Indianapolis? Maybe there's a reason that no other solar companies have moved in there. And at the same time, for entrepreneurs or people who, want to maybe start a company, they could look at that map and say, well, I want to start a solar company, but it's not going to work here because the market's saturated already. Or likewise, another question that could be asked is, if you are looking for a job and you don't want to be an entrepreneur, but you want to move into a certain sector, you could look at the map and say, well, where are the majority of biofuels companies located in what centers? And then maybe that's where you target your search for work or trying to find new clients or something like that. So that's kind of like getting to that whole, like, Mark found solar rooftop companies were in Indianapolis. So maybe that's the market, or maybe there's a reason there's not solar companies that are not rooftop there. And Christina and Lewis looking for specific opportunities based off the soul of the region, I think is a really great idea.
Thomas, that's really great, because then you could also target the financing groups, the investors, and say, hey, I've done my research. There's need here, right? Let's approach this. That's a venture. Wow. Sorry, Lewis. This is
great. I just also say, both Thomas and Eric, you made me think how easy how something like this could make it really easy to propose policy in the region and say, we're as a city trying to push more solar, and as you can see, we are primed to be able to, roll that out easily because of all these companies here, and make arguments to support sustainable policy in that way.
undeniably, right, Heidi? You just point to it, just say, look, right?
And we have one more ecosystem, right? Do we have one more?
We actually have 2 more.
Okay, 2 more. All right. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
So someone from this team, what do we see? How do we feel about this?
This ecosystem found the most ventures out of all of them.
Woo!
Yeah, but they had the biggest population too, right?
It's true. There's 3.28 million is the population for that area.
Versus the Badger region,
which is 258.
Beaver region. Yeah.
Beaver, don't do
no,
that.
I'm kidding.
Now
It's Badger. It's Badger. I'm
that?
joking with you. It's Badger.
Gabe, don't do that. Oh, now I'm all messed up. Cats. If I don't know, I'm just going to say cats.
Sorry.
So what do we see, or how does this compare for fellows who aren't in this region or collecting data for this region? How does this compare to the other places? What is the story that the data is telling us visually? What can we see here?
It's a lot going on. It's very condensed.
Yeah.
I'm actually from St. Paul, so this is kind of what I'd expect, but yeah, there's a lot going on there.
But it does properly represent the idea of St. Paul that you have in your head. That's cool. That's really cool.
So Shannon, would you say that this is one of those epicenters that could move? You look for leading best practices regions. Is this region ready to really take off and lead others, or do you see gaps? What about your teammates too?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not going to speak for everyone. I'll let someone else have a chance too, but I mean, personally, like, I've lived in the Twin Cities my whole life, been in St. Paul the past 5 years, and I think that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of potential. St. Paul and Minneapolis are really making some strides when it comes to clean energy and sustainability in general. So I would say that Minneapolis, St. Paul could lead by example. So I don't know what you guys think.
I see hands now. Raymond, then Aurora, then Jerome, please.
I did say Minneapolis and St. Paul, and one of the sectors I looked into was wind. And I was really delighted to find that a lot of the more of the engineering and technical side of wind, a lot of the companies were headquartered in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I find it like very interesting. Like, I'm wondering why. Maybe like, is it because sort of they got a head start, like sort of in the industry earlier on, or is it because they're more central within the Midwest? I think that's something that's like worth looking into.
Raymond, that's a really interesting observation. I mean, it's a knowledge economy. If you have the engineers, I'm not an engineer, so farthest thing from it. So but you've got to have them, right, Raymond, in order to do things.
Aurora?
Yeah, something I just found interesting is I looked into the coal sector, and the University of Minnesota, they actually have a coal-fired like generating plant on their campus, and I just thought that was kind of interesting, just because it's interesting. I feel like academia a lot of times leads a lot of like renewable energy and innovation like that. So I just thought that was interesting, that I feel like they might need to make that transition to help the community.
Maybe instead of just coal, maybe pair it with carbon capture, right?
Yeah,
sequestration, right? Here's another we can target and call to arms, say, you don't get to keep doing that. You need to do something with it, right, Aurora? Hey, Louis, I think Melody keeps trying to raise her hand.
Yes, I think it was Jeroen, then Melody, and then Karan.
Yeah, so I did solar for this ecosystem, and something that I found really interesting is just a specific venture that I looked into, and it's called SunShare. And what they do is they do community sun gardens. So I thought it was really interesting because it kind of makes it accessible to everyone, so they can subscribe to this company and get the benefits of solar power rather than having to install it. So if you're a renter, you can actually get the benefits of solar power, which I thought was just really awesome.
Jeroen, do you see it? Okay, wait, do it again. Jeroen, do you see it? It's right there.
Yeah, that one.
That's really cool.
And so I think this ecosystem can be a leader in like bringing that accessibility of cleaner forms of energy.
Jeroen, you'd almost need someone then when you find kind of a hidden gem, you'd need to make sure that others see it, right? It can't be that silent voice. It needs to be promoted, right, Jeroen?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Melody and then Karan, and then I do want to see that last ecosystem and ask just 2 more questions before our time is wrapped up. So Melody, go ahead.
Right, so I worked on hydro, and to my surprise, I didn't really find a lot of companies working on hydropower in the Twin Cities itself, but there were, I found a few outside of the region that perhaps control whatever hydropower station are in the system itself. There's a research lab that does hydropower fluid dynamics in the University of Minnesota as well. And a cool startup to shout out. They're doing modular hydropower, like a small system that you can, it's pretty rugged. You can drop it in the river and it generates some electricity, portable. Wow. Yeah, I'm not too sure how old the company is, but it sounds cool to me.
Hey, Melody, you're raising something that I'm gonna pair up with Shayna's comment. Shayna, that's a brilliant comment too. Missed opportunities of resources in your backyard, right? Melody, you're saying there's a river right through it. Look at that, you can see it, undeniable. And Shayna's saying, there's more there, right? How many times does a region miss what's right in their back? How many times do we do that as individuals, right, Louis? We think, man, I'm missing something, and you have it right there.
Yes. So I
Go
was
ahead.
thinking perhaps a lot of the existing power stations right there are pretty old. And I went to this website, hydropower, website, can't remember the name, but a lot of the company names mentioned that did the power station are nowhere to be found. So perhaps they have like rebranded themselves, or yeah, it's just missing. That's curious. And also I found a couple of IoT companies that does automation and parts. And then these companies, on like first glance, I didn't realize they have anything to do with renewable energy. But a bit of digging, most of them usually do all different kinds of renewables. So not just hydropower. I mean, hydropower is the one that led me to these companies. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Karan, very quickly.
Yeah, I did utilities and storage, and there were a lot of big utilities that had a lot of subsidiaries which worked in solar and wind, or they contracted with a lot of the community solar farms or the solar co-ops and made basically constructed their solar farms or their wind farms, which I thought was super interesting. Also, there's this one really huge storage project in and around Minneapolis, which is connected to a solar farm, which I think Mr. Crabtree might have touched on earlier this week. And a really cool thing that Minneapolis is doing is there's this waste recovery center, which takes waste and sort of recycles the metal and converts it to energy, like thermal energy, and then captures the carbon. So it's like super interdisciplinary. And there's a cool tech stuff happening in Minneapolis.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. Can we see St. Louis very quickly? St. Louis, be ready.
Wow. That's dense.
That's dense.
But like what Indianapolis pushed back on me, that's not always means very few people benefit, right?
Right. Maggie, then Gavin, then Aparna, please.
Maggie, you there?
Gavin, go ahead while we figure it out.
Okay, thank you, Lewis. I didn't know what to like look forward to like going into this project, but coming out of it, like I learned so much. I just thought this was such an interesting idea. So I just want to thank you guys for like giving me this opportunity. I did specifically policy, utilities, and lighting, and I also did storage, I think. Basically the like main thing I want to talk about was like the policy. Like I have no idea about St. Louis. So I came into this blind. So I looked up just basically, I went for the first one, I looked for the Sierra Club, like the Sierra Club St. Louis chapter. I looked for the NAACP chapter. And it was just so interesting to just go through all of their chapters. And I was like looking up everyone's LinkedIn's, like finding everyone, like what they're doing specifically, like the NAACP, like they had so many different type of petitions listed on their website. So it was like instant, like you were getting on that website and you're instantly able to like do something and make like a difference. And then another one that I really liked with policy was, it was basically this like law firm, and there were a group of lawyers who were doing like pro bono cases for people who like were basically they were fighting for the environment, fighting for like nature, because there was no one else doing it in the area. So I just thought that was really cool. I followed them on LinkedIn. It was just really cool to look at policy and like find smaller groups that were just making like big impacts in their communities.
Hey, Gavin, quick question. Do you know on your team, that a couple of other regions were commenting how there are job opportunities, new industries to grow. So it's not, so there's new opportunities for new people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know if your teammates found that in St. Louis, or did they find that lacking? Does that make sense, Gavin?
I totally understand what you're saying. I don't want to answer for everybody, but what I will say is I also did lighting and utilities, and there was lots of companies that were super like have been in St. Louis for decades, but like they had LED lights, solar panels. Like obviously they are integrating new technology in their existing businesses. So obviously there must be availability for like new jobs with new technology. So I maybe wouldn't say like new sectors or new groups, but there's like instilling new technology, which would require new people.
Who else on your team? Just curious. Can you do solar in St. Louis? I'm just curious. Not like others.
Becky, what was your comment?
Gavin, you maybe need to call on some of your teammates. We don't know your teammates, Gavin.
Aparna, go ahead. I'm sorry, we're having a hard time hearing you, Maggie.
I could definitely speak to that because so I did incubators and accelerators is one of the main things that I did. And I found so many different funding, like so many different incubators and accelerators that are funding all these startups from so many different sectors. There were only a few that was like this accelerator's just funding startups for biofuels or something like that. But there were definitely a lot that were spanning like the breadth of all different energy corporations and sectors and what they could do. So I think in the next like 5-10 years, I think there definitely will be an increase in all of the sectors, if not just the biofuels or something like that. But I do think there's huge opportunity here just because of the amount of incubators and accelerators that I found.
That's really interesting, Aparna. So you're saying that that's the one sector where if you want to look ahead, that's where you target. Wow, interesting. Yeah. So then you could apply what you've just said. If we went to each region and said there's a deficiency in accelerators, incubators, they're not ready for tomorrow then.
Yeah, so I think even right now, if we were able to like go to these incubators and accelerators and get like a list of what their startups are, like what they're focusing on, I think that would be really interesting to include on the map, even if it's just like some guy's garage right now.
Yeah. Wow.
Maggie, I want to make sure you're heard. So if you can, I can't see the chat right now, but if you could at least put your comment in the chat so we can see what that is.
You did. You know what? Okay. If I can find it, here it is. Okay. Maggie writes, I was surprised by enabling technologies, as well as no overlap in 3 sectors, enabling, solar, and storage. Okay, the intersections, good. The combo and spatial distribution combined to speak to the potential. Lack of ventures east of Mississippi as well. Lack of ventures east of the Mississippi River. So Katie, can you do solar and storage, because there's that obvious intersection between solar and storage. The two need to, and can you also put in wind too, because wind also, there you go. And then let's zoom in. I'd like to see ventures east of the Mississippi. Maggie, wow. If you think about the future of the decarbonized new energy economy, the future new energy economy, it really is, and that's where George comes in. It's that intersection between solar and wind and stored energy, right? Well, here you have, it's pretty robust, but not east of the Mississippi River. Wow.
Right. Carly, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. One of the things I was thinking, so I focused on architecture, construction, built environment, and I was noticing that there were some companies that are headquartered in St. Louis that are international or national or international companies. And so that made me wonder, how much of their location in St. Louis is about impacting St. Louis, and how much of their location is about, real estate prices, and their projects are actually happening in other places. So I was just wanting to kind of keep keep our minds on the limits of the data that we have so far. And I think knowing like from this point where this company is headquartered, what's the actual spread of their impact in that region versus other places would be interesting to investigate.
Carly, that's a really good, we're going to need to think about that, because that is a deficiency. That is somebody, it doesn't, the dot doesn't tell you their interests, except I don't know who it was. Somebody brought up Excel and SunShare, and there's a question about interests and motivations to invest in Excel. I don't know if that was in the thread. Hey, Louis, I think we're getting tight on time. Carly,
yes.
Great.
Really quickly.
Yes.
Carly, I hope you made some comments like that in the notes section, because that's interesting. And the same to the rest of you with what you've brought up, because some of these comments on specifically some of these certain companies, that's your editorial voice, and we'd want to know that. So thank you. I hope so.
Yeah.
And Louis, again, you're going to be bringing us on home, but again, any fellows that are interested in digging a little deeper into this, maybe writing up a thought leadership piece, there are honorariums available for you. So, and you obviously see the benefit, but wow, this was way beyond, I knew it was going to be effective, Louis, but wow.
This is really cool. And the last two questions, and we don't have to answer them, just think about them, fellows. The first question was, and I know Heidi's doing some really cool work on it. I was hoping she could talk about it, but one question, after looking at all these and we have access to them, think about how these maps can be improved. What are we missing? How can we improve the actual maps themselves? And share that kind of information with the organizers and our leaders and each other. And the second one was, as we look at these, how do we hope these maps will change, and how do we predict these maps will change in the next 20 years? I was really interested to hear about that. And while I hope that we'll take on more ventures in order to decarbonize and become more sustainable, but my favorite answer that I wanted to leave you guys with, which is what I predict will be on all these maps, somewhere will be you guys. It will be your business. It'll be your startup. It'll be your nonprofit. It'll be your law firm. And so that's what I'm really excited to see more than anything. As we continue to make maps like this and see things pop up, seeing you guys on the map, because I know it's going to happen. Thank you.
Thomas, I'm not going to say anything. Louis brought that one. That was.
Yeah, I mean, now you know why we asked him to help out. This is perfect. Okay, cool. I'm gonna take it out or take it home then. So before I turn off the recording and the live on YouTube, and then we'll have a mini discussion right afterwards. Thanks so much to all the fellows for participating in SISE this year. It's kind of weird because usually there's a huge party at the very end, and we're gonna kind of go out with a discussion this afternoon. But with that, thank you all so much for joining us this week on a really interesting digital adventure. And at that point, see you next year for SISE. But don't go away, nobody yet, because we got to talk. All right.